All right, Kiss Army, welcome to the KissFAQ Podcast. Thank you for giving us your time today and letting us into your head. I hope we don't do any damage. This is a Kiss-related podcast by the board, for the board. We hope that you enjoy. We'd love you to support this show. Please like, follow, and subscribe to us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Your likes and subscription helps us to grow and attract interviews and content. So please retweet and share our posts. Your contributions are appreciated. Welcome to episode 487 of the KissFAQ Podcast. I'm your host, Julian Gill. Today I'm joined by a friend and a collaborator and an author, a fellow author, Tim Durling. Welcome.
Hi, Julian. Thanks for having me on. This is it's a real pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to get you onto the KissFAQ podcast to do a talk about Kiss, your book. I'm not going to say it's new, but your newly available on Amazon book, Unspooled. Before we get into, kind of the subject matter about this, I want you to give people a little bit of a recap of the history of Unspooled, because you originally started that out as a Kickstarter project. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. It was back in 2021, which seems like a long time ago. I had the germ of the idea about the book for a long, long time. But I was encouraged to take it a little bit further. And, before going into it too far, I have to give so much credit to a longtime friend, Matt Phillips from Go North Design. Because without him, this book wouldn't exist, or if it did, it wouldn't look nearly as good as it does, because he really put a lot of work into the layouts. And anyone who's seen the book knows that just every page just pops, and I can't really take any credit for that. So, we did start it as a Kickstarter campaign. I would say it was a fairly successful one. We got boxes of books showed up, and then it was packaging them up and making them, putting different tiers of orders together, some goodies to go with them, tote bags and things like that. And eventually we sold out of our both hardcovers and soft covers. And that was it. And then, but always in the back of my head, I thought, wouldn't it be cool if I could make this available long term and also honestly make it a lot easier for us. That's, there's no more traipsing to the post office with boxes and boxes and getting them weighed and making sure they're packaged well enough. And so couldn't be any happier with the way that the second edition, the updated edition, has turned out.
Now, how did the project work? Did you write a book first before you started the Kickstarter and have it all designed by Matt before you ever started that Kickstarter? And what was the purpose of the Kickstarter? Was that to pay for the creation or to pay strictly for the printing, which is a pretty heavy cost for a color book?
We had the book designed. The book was designed and written, and a lot of guest authors contributed, such as yourself. No, we pretty much had it. It was a finished thing by the time that we went to Kickstarter. It was purely to get some capital to, pay for the printing and pay for the, offset some of the shipping costs.
Was that something that scared you, getting into self-distribution of a book and having, say, a pallet arrive at your home? And now I've got to get rid of all these.
It's pretty intimidating. Yeah, it was pretty intimidating. I mean, I did have a lot of people in my family that were within driving distance so that I could deliver them myself, and, friends of friends. But we had orders from all over the world. We had orders from the UK. We had orders from, all over the States. We had orders from Australia. And it was a little bit intimidating. I mean, once the initial excitement of seeing all those boxes of something that you created show up, it's like, now the longer these are here, the more these are costing. I'm not going to get any return on this. And, in the end, you don't go rich doing this, but, we did all right. And it was such a passion project that I could, it just turned out so well. But yeah, it's intimidating at first, but Kickstarter is, a pretty good platform for, if you need to get something like that done. But, hindsight being what it is, we probably would have gone the print on demand route from the get-go. But you know what? It's a learning experience.
Yet I don't think they were quite up to snuff yet on the quality component, and also some of the cost limitations and design challenges that come into. And that's only from my own experience of why I've always made my books black and white. Is usually I've seen color as a roadblock, either in terms of cost or you've got a designer. That makes one massive difference in book creation, is when you have a partner who's strictly looking at it from a visual perspective, and you're handing over copy and they're taking that copy and interpreting it into something visual that's going to be appealing. And I want to echo what you said about Matt. Absolutely fantastic design, and more importantly, it comes across as equal in quality on the new Amazon version as it did the original color print. So congratulations to Matt on that.
Yeah, Matt, I always say he never ever settles for, oh, that looks okay. He always says, I want, I want you to love it. I want you to love how it looks. And he's got such a critical eye for it. And there's times it's like, Matt, you've shown me 5 different variants. They all look good to me. I don't know. But usually, when the finished product comes out, I'll go, yeah, I really, that really was the right decision to make it look like this. But yeah, the Amazon, that was a concern. And we had talked to you about that, based on how Mass Hysteria turned out. We're very, very pleasantly surprised with the color quality. The white text doesn't disappear into the red, and like it came out really, really well.
Yeah, the bleeds are fantastic. The clarity and the separation is great, and they're not using a super high tech print process for the production of their books. It really doesn't look like what the technology is, which is so impressive. What were some of the challenges that you faced as a Kickstarter? Were there any, or were you so well prepared when you went into that and you cut loose on that? Did it go as smoothly as you expected, or were there any gotchas or learning bumps along the road?
I can't really recall any big snags there, but I do have to mention to folks watching, Julian was a big help, in giving Matt some pointers on how to transfer the files to the Amazon format, because Matt had tried different times and just kept running into roadblock after roadblock, and it was just a few formatting issues. But man, once that happened, that made all the difference. So, but as far as the Kickstarter, I'm sure there were things that came up at the time, but no, I just remember, the excitement of going back to check the Kickstarter page and watching the orders, grow. And I knew that going into this, we'll get to what the book's about, but I knew that it was uh, a very niche area that I was talking about. I joked that it's niche within niche. So I knew that there would be a limited audience, but I also knew that we had something very cool that, if we marketed correctly, could appeal to people that just like a good music book. It's partially a reference book. It's partially, there's a little bit of autobiographical content about me in there, but there's a lot of cool visuals. And basically, I think most people will tell you that if they've ever gone into, done a book themselves, they would have just as soon found a book in the marketplace about the topic they want to talk about and just bought it. But I could not find one, and I still can't find one. So I perceived the deficit. So let's fill the deficit.
And that somewhat answers what was going to be the question of why 8 tracks. But in terms of your personal story, where do 8 tracks fit in and come into your life, and how have they become something that was worthy of your time in doing a book? I mean, a full-fledged book is a hell of a commitment, whether it's 8 tracks or any other topic. But you obviously had enough of a reason and motivation to do it. Where does that come from?
Oh, the scary skull jelly in my head, Julian. It's a strange topic to write a book about, but I'm happy to talk about it. I'm old enough to remember when 8 tracks were popular. I was born in '74, so I remember having. I was always fascinated by music, and I was always fascinated by formats. Seeing artwork and the big 12 by 12 canvas that is vinyl, or seeing it little tiny cassette, or seeing it on an 8 track, when I was really little, seeing the same picture, for some reason that always just intrigued me. But I remember, cousins of mine having things like Blondie, the Cars, um, artists like that on 8-track, and putting them in and out of the machine, and remembering a lot of them breaking down and getting tangled up and having to try and respool them or rescue them from the player. And but that's all that's where it started. But there was no thing, somebody should write a book about this. But in the late 80s, actually 1990 to be exact, I was, my music collection was growing, and I was buying primarily cassettes at this point. I had a little bit of vinyl, but I came across a flea market that was selling tables upon tables of 8-tracks, because by the late 80s and the early 90s, there was no resale value in 8-tracks.
They were 10
whatsoever.
cents, so please take them away.
Stores would be selling them at just cut rate prices, right? They just couldn't. There was no value in them. I compare it to like VHS tapes now. You just see piles of them everywhere, right? And I wonder if there's ever going to come a time when people will be like, "Oh man, I wish I'd have kept my such and such, VHS." But it was very much, there was no value in them. But I came across a copy of Journey's Escape, which I was a big fan, always been a big fan, and it was $1. So more the novelty of it, really, seeing an album I liked on 8-track form. So I bought it, and for a while that was the only one I had. But what really took root and what really made me want to do this is sometime in the mid 90s, I want to say 95 or 96, I had started to have the thought of, trying to collect these things. And, rock bands, or classic rock bands, especially harder rock bands, you just didn't see them on 8-track, even though you knew they existed. They had to have existed, being on major labels, and, you just knew that they were out there. But usually you'd find old country 8-tracks or disco or various artists or easy listening. You'd find plenty of, Engelbert Humperdinck, and, so, but what really did it was I discovered a website called 8trackheaven.com, which you can go on now and look at an archived version of it. It's not active anymore, but there is an archived version of it. And it was a really handy site for information about, how they worked. And but there was one section that changed it all, and there was a section called the 80s Only Club, or the 80s Only Record Club Only 8-tracks, RCOs. I use the term RCOs a lot. And this is when I discovered that 8-tracks did not disappear completely as early as I would have thought. Because if someone would have asked me back then, so when did they stop making 8-tracks? Then I would say, well, I'm not really sure, but I would have to think sometime around 1981, 1982. That's when my memories of like people in my family, most people just started buying cassettes. I just remember seeing cassettes, when I'd visit aunts and uncles and stuff, where they'd have the 8-track player out. Now they've got, if they don't have a tape deck or a record player, then they'd have one of those 8-track adapters that you'd set the cassette down in and play your cassette through the 8-track player, which I always thought was genius. So I made sure to include a photo of one of those. So I would have thought that by the early 80s, they were no more. And I know a lot of people think of them as a 70s medium, and that's definitely when they had their peak of popularity was the 70s. Because I think in the 70s, the quality of an 8-track tape was much higher than that of a cassette. I think that once cassettes got to a point where they were of a higher quality, they kind of overtook. Also, there were lots of issues with the format. It's a strange format, the way that they were put together. A lot of times the songs were out of order. They'd have to break songs up between programs. There were 4 programs as opposed to 2 sides. 4 stereo programs, 4 times 2, 8. That's why they're called 8-tracks. And, there were just a lot of things that were going against the format. But I found out that Columbia House, RCA Music Service, those, the record clubs, continued to make 8-track tapes available through most of the 1980s. And there were some pictures of some examples. And the first one that I noticed was George Harrison's Cloud 9, which came out in 1987. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, an album that came out in 1987 was made on 8-track? This, what? And then I saw David Lee Roth eat him and smile. And I was like, whoa, like, and this was mind blowing for me. It opened up this whole world. I realized then that there was a whole like hidden underground subsection that I knew nothing about. I had previously known nothing about. This also meant that the amount of tapes that I would be looking for to collect from artists that I like just increased by how much I wasn't sure. It didn't seem like there were a lot of harder rock bands, but there were a few. And it just blew my mind that all the way up until 1988, you could still get certain titles on 8-track. Now, this is Columbia House slash and also RCA Music Service, which later became BMG's music service. This is in the U.S. From all of my research, it seems like Columbia House in Canada stopped in 1984. But even then, that's past most people would have no idea that albums in 1984 were being made on 8-track, because unless you were a member of the record clubs, you didn't see them. And I didn't know anybody in my family that was a member of Columbia House or any other record club. So this really opened up a new world of collecting. And then, of course, with the advent of eBay, every once in a while you'd see them. Now they're crazy expensive, right? Depending on the popularity of the titles. So, if to bring it into the Kiss world a little bit, in case anybody's wondering, Animalize is the last known Kiss album to be produced on 8-track. And even that in and of itself seems like Animalize on 8-track? Yes. Go on Discogs, you will see it. Go on
and then see the price that it goes for.
Yeah. So oddly enough, Lick It Up seems to be the more costly one. Animalize seems to come up more often. I'm not sure why that is. But, just to give you that example. But, I mean, and I don't know what the criteria was for when they actually decided to stop. Like, I don't know if it was a decision by band or management to say, no, we don't want, yes, we'll allow our albums to be available through the record clubs, which my understanding is they made next to nothing. It was a real
record club royalty rates were notoriously rubbish.
Yes, but record clubs were also notoriously ripped off. I can't tell you how many times I've heard. I've never done this, but I do know. I know a lot of people that used to be able to do this. You'd get the introductory offer, the 11, 12, albums for a penny or whatever, and they'd get it sent general delivery. And that would be the end of that. They've got their 12 CDs. A lot of times they take them to the pawn shop and get $2 a CD, and they just made, So yeah, it was I've called it, and then there's the selection of the month card you'd get, the negative billing option, where if you didn't send back the card, you'd end up with probably an album you didn't want, or one you've already had for 6 months. Because that was the other thing about the record clubs. They would take a long, long time before they would get certain titles in. And then some titles, they just wouldn't get in, because there were certain bands, I think, that just wouldn't allow their albums through it. But the fact that a lot did, I was really shocked at the titles that did. And I always wish that there was somewhere some sort of reference where I could find out which ones were actually made. And really that was my initial goal for this book. But what really changed that around for the better was early 2021. I have to say that the one of the unexpected boosts that came from the quarantine thing is that, getting to use Zoom and StreamYard as we do, I've met a lot of people, yourself included, and, doing a channel, my people that I can talk to just expanded. And I reached out because we'd done a mutual show on Rush fans with Martin Popoff, who I've been a longtime fan of Martin's books, right? And so I thought, you know what, while this is still fresh in his mind, I'm going to message him to see if he wants to come on my show. And specifically, I asked him the very question: what does he remember about 8 tracks in the 80s? And he generously agreed to come on. We've done a lot of shows together, but he had no concept that he would have thought late 70s they would have phased them out. So he was really shocked to find this out. And he said someone should do a book on this. And so here I thought, if Martin Popoff thinks there's a book idea here,
Martin of all people,
yeah, and he's not going to do it, maybe there's a book here. So, and then I went to Matt. I said, and I basically said, what do you think? And we talked about it, and he was very generous very, very generous with his expertise and his knowledge. I mean, it's one thing to ask a buddy to help you, move something. This was a big ask, but man, did he ever step up to the plate. And over months, that was January of 2021 when I talked to Martin. So I think it was September or October when we finally went live on Kickstarter. It was a long process, but I got my picture taking skills up to speed, because I took a lot of pictures of my own stuff on my porch, trying to get the lighting just right. And I'd send them to Matt, and he'd say, almost there, not quite, tilted a little bit this way. So, by the end, I got to know. I would take 2 or 3, shots and go, I think he's going to like this third one. And he'd like, that. So yeah, it was a long process coming to that. But I really was just looking to have like a list, a year by year list through the 1980s of what titles are confirmed, known to exist. But then Martin suggested that I have some collecting stories in there too. And that really was the turning point, because he took it from, it would have served the purpose, but it turned into something that anyone who's got nostalgia for the 70s and 80s, especially the 80s, because it really does go through the 80s of music collecting, can enjoy. You don't have to know a single thing about 8-track tapes. If you're into classic rock, there's something in this book to enjoy. And it really became this hybrid thing, which the only thing about it is it makes it very difficult to explain to someone in a hurry when they say, what's your book about? But, that's why I like to send them to the Amazon link now, which is great. It's like, here you go. You can look through it. Yeah, that's how it all came. That's how it all came about. And this new edition that's on Amazon is basically the same thing, except as these things go, I don't know if there'll ever be a definitive list on what albums are confirmed.
I don't think that's a technical possibility to have a definitive list,
No.
because there's always going to be some obscure issue. I mean, we've talked when we talked Aerosmith, we talked about the Done with Mirrors 8-track.
Yeah.
I've still not found one of those.
No, nor am I.
And you just never know what's going to pop up. From the Kiss realm, I mean, most Kiss people who come into the collecting era know about those 2 Columbia House ones,
yes,
for Lick It Up and Animalize, but they don't necessarily know about the other end of the spectrum, which are the Ampex ones from 74, 75, which are the original, they're in-house. So they're for Casablanca. They are official releases, but they're manufactured by a third-party company who also made their cassette tapes at the time. And one of the things that I'm interested in, and it's way outside the scope of your book, but I'm wondering if you've ever started keeping track of some of the alternative mixes that are on 8 tracks in the Kiss realm, to make those albums fit on those 4 segments. You mentioned earlier that a lot of voodoo was often done with moving songs around, to splitting songs into part 1, part 2. But they also did things like cut and paste. They would extend outros to make it fit to the track length and add in an extra chorus in some cases. I mean, do you have a tape player, an 8-track player, and do you go into that level of insanity, or is that just something that I would do?
I used to have a little, to answer your question, no, I don't chronicle that. I know that, for example, if you're a diehard Pink Floyd fan, there are, I think it's Animals, that contains so many seconds of a David Gilmour guitar solo that's only in that format for that very reason, to make it. But no, I used to have a little portable player, but it ate up too many tapes of mine, and I don't have the patience nor the inclination to work on these things, because there are people who work on these, and these things require so much maintenance to keep them playing and keep the players in good shape. I admire that, but I don't have that level of commitment. I want to buy the tapes, put them up on my wall, and listen to the CD, and just look at the ones that I've got and go, that's good enough for me. But no, I know that there are probably all sorts of variants, because, people may or may not know, even if they know a little bit about 8-tracks, you could not rewind 8-tracks. You could only fast forward them. And of the 4 programs, the labels tried to keep them approximately the same length, so there weren't big gaps of space, of silence between the programs. And if you had a minute and a half gap of silence between, say, program 1 and program 2, you might think, well, just press on to the next program. But the problem is, it didn't advance to the beginning of the next program. It advanced to where you were at on that first program. If you're 9.5 minutes in on program 1, that's where it's going to end up when you hit the program change to program 2. So you're going to lose all those songs too. It's a really, really weird medium, and sometimes it results in the strangest of track listings that don't make any sense whatsoever. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why things like those 2 Kiss 8-tracks can be so expensive when they do come on the market, because you've got your 8-track collectors, you've got your RCO collectors, then you got your Kiss collectors, which is what your chapter in my book is about, because we are crazy. Yeah. And I found that hard rock and metal, particularly, those are the 8-tracks that command the ridiculously expensive prices. Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil, that is a highly sought after 8-track.
I'm looking for Too Fast for Love. I've seen one, and I'm not too sure whether it's legit.
I don't think it's legit, Julian. I don't think that was ever.
I don't know, because Columbia House in Canada did do Too Fast early on. So, and of course, in Canada, Too Fast for Love originally came out with the leather mix.
With the leather mix.
So what I'm thinking is,
it's possible. Because I can't say. That's the thing. I can't say for sure, but I do know for sure that both Columbia House and RCA Music Service did Shout at the Devil, because they look very, very different. That I've seen that on eBay for $600 plus. They're not RCO tapes, but the first 3 Iron Maiden albums, the U.S. Capitol versions, those go for ridiculous amounts of money. Like you said, Done with Mirrors, that is so. There doesn't seem to be a Columbia House variant of it, just the RCA Music Service one. I'd love to get my hands on one of those. That's the last known Aerosmith 8-track. But that also begs the question, why is it the last known one? And there's a section in my book where I talk about some what ifs, and Kiss and Aerosmith are both in there.
So what are your what ifs that kind of come into play? Is it down to band? Is it down to record label? Is it down to sales volume? Or is there some other parameter that's coming into the mix?
Right. Well, it's based on a combination of things. But there is a chapter in my book where I talk about albums that could potentially exist on 8-track. And a lot of times it's based on their peers, bands that are similar, bands that are on the same label that did have albums that came out in that later period. For example, Kiss, it's an easy example for Kiss because Animalize is the last known one. But I said, well, what about Asylum? Because in 1985, you had Done with Mirrors, you had Aerosmith, you had Autograph, that's the stuff. You had Dokken, Under Lock and Key, which is another highly sought after one. Like there's been one picture of that circulate on the internet for 30 years, and it's like one of the most highly sought after ones. But Dokken 8-track, for crying out loud. But the example that I use with Kiss is Power Windows by Rush, because that's the last Rush 8-track known to exist on 8-track. That came out in the fall of 1985. As did Asylum. Both of those acts were on Mercury Records in the States. Sound nothing alike, but they got marketed together a lot.
Was Rush's RCO, or was it still beige polygram media?
Oh no, it's a RCA Music Service version.
Okay,
doesn't seem to be a Columbia House one, But it makes me wonder, if Mercury went through the trouble of making it for an album like Power Windows, um, at this point, Kiss were coming off a platinum album. They were kind of gaining some steam. Why wouldn't they have put Asylum out? It's very possible that, it wouldn't. I can't say it didn't happen. I've got no evidence of it. And I have to have evidence of it before I have it in my year-end lists. This is purely speculative. And Aerosmith is the other one. I thought, why don't Classics Live and Classics Live 2 exist? And the reason for that is it's Columbia House was a division of CBS Records. It would have been very, very easy for CBS to pop those out, and they might sell a few. When someone has, they've got 2 left on their obligation and they're through with Columbia House. Oh, I'll get these 2 Aerosmith ones. So there's little things like that come along that you think, well, why does this one exist and this one doesn't? And every once in a while, you get to a point where you'll notice that there are skips in a catalog wherein 8-track, here's one that doesn't have an 8-track, the one after it does. Rat Out of the Cellar, great example. Because, believe it or not, the Rat EP and Invasion of Your Privacy are confirmed to exist on 8-track. But their biggest selling album, right in the middle, Out of the Cellar, doesn't seem to. Or at least it hasn't surfaced yet. It just these are the factors that have gone into compiling these lists, because I can't go on, well, I think I remember seeing it. I need myself to see a legitimate picture of it, or at least to see it listed in an old ad where they would list, the titles that are available. One that evaded me for a long time until someone generously sent me a photo of it, because they found it in a lot. Like they bought a lot of 40 just to get the one, was the first album by Coney Hatch. Great Canadian band, not enough people know about. But their first album was it was on Mercury Records in the States, but like Rush, it was on Anthem Records in Canada. And I found an old Columbia House insert, something that would have been inside like a Reader's Digest back in 1982. And titles that weren't available on 8-track had an asterisk next to them. Titles that didn't have an asterisk were. And Coney Hatch's debut album was one of them. So I thought, okay, that's a pretty good indication that it exists. But until I found a picture of it, I didn't put it in the list in the first edition under 1982. Now it's in the second list because I have seen a picture of it. It's so obscure, as a matter of fact, that I had Andy Curran from Coney Hatch on Tim's Vinyl Confessions. He had no idea that music he played on was available on 8-track. So I expect one of these days there'll be a bidding war on eBay between Andy and myself.
If one comes up and hasn't gone to the landfill, I think one of the things that that kind of jumps into my mind on this is record labels. Rat was Atlantic. Geffen, of course, was a Warner company for Aerosmith. Polygram was, Polygram. And Polygram, I seem to remember reading an article in Billboard about them in 1984 that they were going all in with cassettes. That was going to be their big format push for the 1980s as sales of vinyl decreased. So that is kind of what I've always figured from that point with Kiss, is because they'd made the massive transition to cassette tapes in 1984. They'd reissued the catalog in 1985 on cassette specifically.
Right.
With much less volume of vinyl available at that time, that is where all the focus was. I'd have to dig it up, but I would think you can find it in one of the Billboard archives that PDI Polygram is going all in with cassettes as their primary format.
That makes sense, because cassettes were everywhere. Everybody I knew of all ages, we bought cassettes. They were portable, but it just, that leads to this. They're out of these 8-tracks that existed from, say, 83 onward. They're out of time. It doesn't make sense for these albums to exist in this arcane format, but they do. And just like most things, I thought, because most things are a Google search away, but this isn't.
No.
You'll find everything but. So I really wanted something that was on paper, and that you could say, okay, these ones are at least known to exist. Now, in the second edition, there were probably about 24 titles that have been added, ones that I discovered after the fact that did indeed exist. I saw a picture of, and there were a couple that were actually removed because another big source of information for me is a Facebook page that I'm a member of called 8-Track Fixation, where a lot of very knowledgeable people, they know their RCOs, and there were a couple listed. There was actually one is Kiss oriented, related, but one was Alan Parsons' Project Eye in the Sky, and the other one was 707 Megaforce with Todd Howarth.
Todd Howarth, of course. Yep.
And I had those down in the 1982 year-end list as RCOs, but I was told, and with pictures to prove it, these are not RCOs. There are retail editions of both of these, so I took those out. That's the kind of thing that you talk about here. And the other issue, as I mentioned with the Coney Hatch, until I saw a picture of that, I didn't want to put it in the year-end list, because I often wonder, were titles offered or listed in the catalog or the inserts as available on 8-Track, but never manufactured? What was the pressings of some of these would have to have been so small, even for the biggest of sellers. If you break down an album, let's say Animalize, it's a 1 million selling album in the US, and I think it sold 1 million copies within its life. It wasn't like it was certified years down the road, anything. I think it sold 1 million copies within a year. Probably at least half of those were cassettes. Probably the big majority of that was on cassette. Some vinyl, maybe some CDs, because Polygram was a bit of a leader with CDs because of Philips and all that. But how many on 8-Track? And would they even count those as sales? So how many of them would they made? 50, 100? I don't know. I don't have the answers to that. But it boggles the mind, and it just was more. I wanted to get down what I did know.
Right. So in terms of Kiss, Creatures of the Night is the last in-house
retail, the last retail one. It's really, really rare too. You never see it.
It's tough. And I mean, I talked to you when we spoke last about 8-Tracks. I said how I'd been on the hunt for a music from the Elder one because I wanted to, do a transfer of the 8-Track to, yeah, thanks.
I know people out there are like, what? Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the last one I have. I've never seen Creatures for sale. Never mind. So it's not a matter of like, well, how much would it cost? It's not just that. It's like the people.
It is literally supply and demand at this point.
The people that have them are holding on to them. Now I got to say, I'm kicking myself for not doing a buy it now on eBay on an Animalize. I think it was $250 US. And when I think about it now, I wish I'd have pulled the trigger.
That's a good price now.
It's not bad. And I wish I'd have pulled the trigger because you know what? I'd say, geez, I just spent, but I would have had it. At least I would have had that end one. And I hate bidding. So a buy it now, yeah, I really should have just worry about it later,
Yeah, but why would you want to do you have Look It Up? I think you just said that's the last one.
The Elder is the very last
See,
one.
I can't handle gaps. If I had the Animalize and the Elder and not Creatures and Lick It Up and very little opportunity to get a Lick It Up, that would drive me bonkers.
Well, it would certainly fire me up to keep looking, you know what I mean? But it would be hard to pass. Well, I did pass it up, but it's hard because it's like, because then you could come across the ones, the two in between, and then you still don't have Animalize. Like, I could have had that one. It's a weird, and then most rational people, Julian, would go, why do you guys even care? But why do people collect anything? Everybody, a lot of people collect something. So that's the other thing about this book is that even if you don't collect 8-Tracks, if you collect anything, you'll find there are similarities and the thing, whatever drives you to be obsessed with collecting certain things, you'll find yourself in there just looking for whatever it is, right? And Creatures is in an odd one too, because there doesn't seem to be any. It wouldn't be an RCO because it did come out as a Casablanca, like a like a beige polygram one like
Right,
this.
but a
Um,
lot of the 70s tapes came out as Casablanca 8 tracks, and you cannot find them. All you can find are the bloody Columbia House
yeah,
issues with the
but
wrong color media.
there doesn't seem to be any record club issues of Creatures of the Night. It wouldn't. I put Asylum in as an example of a what if, but the non-makeup Creatures might have been more likely because that was earlier in 1985. Never even heard tell of one of those existing. I got to tell you, if if I came across a copy of the non-makeup cover as an RCO, yeah, I'd still like to have the makeup cover, but I'd have something to fill the spot. You know what I mean? But there doesn't seem to be. It just seemed like they stopped cold in 1984, where other bands of their vintage kept going with the albums that were available. Also, it should be mentioned that Kiss were on Polygram, Casablanca, later Polygram, and then Aerosmith on Geffen, Warner, Elektra, Atlantic. Those were like the neutral labels, so you can find copies of those as RCOs for both Columbia House and with RCA. But if you were an artist on CBS Records, for example, there weren't any RCA Music Service carts of your albums. So, by the same token, if you were an RCA artist, you didn't find your albums on Columbia House. At least that seems to be where the cutoff was. It was only like the neutral labels that licensed their albums to both. I really wish that I could have talked to someone who worked for Columbia House in the 80s. I would love to get the behind the scenes on, when someone sends in an order. Walk me through that process. Is it something where somebody, in 1987 is processing the incoming orders and they go, oh, somebody wants Michael Jackson Bad on 8-track. That's 50 now. I guess we got to run them off. Is that the kind of process that they went through?
It couldn't be, because I've got mastering documentation for 8 tracks. They had to be specially mastered.
Yes. Yeah.
In order to do the format. Every format had to have its own master. You don't have one universal master.
Yeah, you couldn't use a
vinyl. We're running
master
that into an 8-track today. It doesn't work that way. Everything has to be specifically prepared, and everything that's prepared has a cost associated with it.
Yeah. That's the other thing, and I have to think that's why they finally curtailed it in 1988, because starting in 1986, CDs were available through Columbia House. I've got a reprint of an ad that says compact discs now available. So that meant there was a window between 1986 and 1988 that you had 4 formats for an album that you would have wanted, and you had to indicate which one it was you wanted. There's an article in there about the only box set that's known to exist in all 4 of those formats. So I have to think the costs associated with it, where it's like, okay, enough's enough. We're done with the 8 tracks. And 3 years later or so, they were done with vinyl too.
Yeah, who distributed Dark Horse for Cloud 9?
Warner Brothers.
So that's a Warner label. I mean, I can somewhat understand that lingering that late because of George's demographic. But was Steel Wheels available as an 8-track?
By 89, there aren't any. The only 8 tracks that you saw after 88 were like the TV commercials. Time Life presents, Sessions presents, Secret Love. That might be available on 8-track, but other than that, no, there weren't any albums that I know of that came out. November 15th, 1988 seems to be the cutoff. And there are 2 albums that came out. I talk about them in the book. One I have, one I do not. I finally have one of them, Journey's Greatest Hits.
Wow.
November 15th, 1988 on 8-track. Down to this small print, and, just the sticker's crooked, just slap it on there. But when I first bought Escape in 1990, I would have had no idea that just 2 years previous, Here's the Greatest Hits, which is, like I said, I listened to all the time, would have come out on 8-track. Would have had no idea. So, this blows my mind. There's no music on this from 1988, but still, this is when it was released. I do find that there are certain trends. The lists, 84, 85 seem to be the peak, and then they drastically drop off the number of known titles. If you were a fan of country music in the 80s and you had an 8-track player, you were well served, because in 1988, it's mostly country artists or superstars, like absolute superstars that tended to have their albums available on 8-track longer than most. Most, harder rock metal bands, 85, 86 seemed to be the cutoff for a lot of them. By the time 87 rolled around, you weren't seeing, Dokken or Def Leppard or Kiss but again, I say that the fact that they made 8 tracks in November of 1988, to me, that means anything's a possibility if it was on a major label. But until I see it, it won't be in a book.
Let's wrap this with, let's see.
I did get some show and tell out. You had asked me about certain bands.
Yep.
So you mentioned Aerosmith. Well, okay, so I don't have Done with Mirrors. Newest one I have is this, which is retail.
That I saw one of those this week. I went down to Amoeba in San Francisco just to see what I could see in the 8-track collection there. And they had no hard rock. I think they had lots of Buddy Miles and Hugh Masekela.
Yes.
And country.
And the crazy thing about these, I don't know about this one in particular, Julian, but if you buy this and you have a Discogs account, you can scan that barcode and it works. I did that with April Wine, Nature of the Beast on Capitol. It had the Capitol ones had the barcode on the side. I scanned it and Discogs came up, 8-track edition, Nature of the Beast, Capitol Records. I thought, wow, they were ahead of their time on those barcodes. So I classify, in levels of completeness in my collection. There's 3 different distinctions. There's retail, which is all the known retail ones. There's retail. There's complete, which is all the retails, all the RCO, and then there's retail complete plus, which means that I don't have all the RCOs, but I got something that's extra. And in the case of Aerosmith, I've got all of them from the first album through Rock and Hard Place, and I managed to find this. So Cheap Trick, I'm only missing one. I'm missing Next Position Please, which is an RCO, but I do have this one. It's a little beat up. This is a retail one. And when you see the RCOs, they look vastly different. And then, as Cheap Trick fans know, there's this too, from 2009. And there's actually a really nice article about this in the book, with someone that was partially responsible for making this happen. So I already showed you The Elder, much to Julian's chagrin. The other rare Kiss one I have is
Peter. That's the U.S. or the Canadian?
That's the U.S. one. The Canadian one looks way different. I mean, yeah, it would be nice to have them in the box where it's like this, but. And finally, one of the rarest ones. This is one of the. It's one of the last. We're getting into the last few months of retail ones with Rush Signal. So again, this would have come out, within a month or so around Creatures of the Night coming out. So this is what the format would look like.
I always loved that PDI beige.
Me too. They made the cassettes like that too. Yeah, I like it too. But one of the rarest 8-tracks I own is the only Canadian one I have past 81. I paid a bit of
glorious album. Glorious album.
And for many, so this is a Canadian one on Anthem, distributed by Columbia House, and it's in really good shape. It's really smooth. And until about 5 years ago, I would have said, well, now I've got all the Rush 8-tracks, because it was only 5 years ago that I found out Power Windows existed, and that threw everything out of the water. As a matter of fact, a lot of people thought the last known retail 8-track to be released was, I think, Prince 1999, which came out in October of 1982, but it has since been discovered that Pyromania exists as a retail
it does
8-track, and again, it looks like one of these if you get it in the States. And that came out in January 83. So 83, there's probably, I think I wrote down in the book, there's like 6 known retail albums, but it was pretty much over. But there's more to it than that. There's stories about collecting, and it goes through year by year, starting in 1981, going through 1988. About there's a little bit about me, what I was doing because I was just a kid, and I think there's a personal touch that I tried to put into this book. And at the end of each year, there's that list of known RCOs to exist. So that's the reference part of it. There's a lot of cool stories in here from other people that have generously donated their time. You donated a great chapter on Kiss collecting. I still laugh when you talk about, I think his name was Tom, who was always one step ahead of you with the Kiss collectibles. And I relate to that. So I tried to get some of that in there. I've got a great article that somebody wrote up as a comment on one of my YouTube videos about how 8-track actually worked. I've got Bill Flanagan, who's a teacher that talks about playing them in his classroom and his students becoming interested in them. There's great stuff in here. You need know nothing about 8-track tapes or care. But if you grew up in the 70s and 80s and you have that music nostalgia and you love listening to that old stuff, and you still collect stuff today, there's a lot to love in this book. Just the fact that it's just gorgeously laid out, and it looks good on the shelf.
Yep. Well, that's just before I wrap up. Tom, I don't know whether we had talked the last time about Tom, but he showed up on every single Kiss website during the winter. There was a Kiss fan in upstate New York who was snow blowing his sidewalk with a Gene Simmons mask on. And it turned out that was Tom. And I messaged him. I said, "Hey, are you such and such?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "Oh, great."
Yeah. The bane of your existence.
Yep. So he's still alive and well. Tim, I want to take thank you for taking the time to join us today. Our audio is crapping out, so let's end there. Unspooled, available. Let's see, I can get this. Oh, let's actually get the right one. Get the Amazon one. Unspooled, available on Amazon now. Plenty of Kiss content and plenty of 8-track content and cool stories. Tim, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Julian.
Thank you for spending time listening to the KissFAQ podcast today. All sales are final. There are no refunds. If you'd like, look us up on Facebook or come over to the KissFAQ message board and discuss the topic we've broadcast today. Don't forget to rate us on iTunes, Spreaker, or wherever you've listened to the show. We hope you'll join us again.